The alarm screams echoed through the human ship as another explosion rocked the hull. Corporal Jiho Park gripped his rifle and pressed himself against the wall. Around him, his squad mates scrambled to their positions. The Valorian Empire's flagship had found them. "They're boarding," someone shouted. Jiho's heart pounded. 3 years of war had taught him that Valorians were fierce warriors. They stood nearly 8 feet tall with scales like armor and claws that could tear through metal. But humans had something the Valorians didn't expect. Humans were stubborn. "Humans didn't quit. Hold the line!" Commander Taeyang Cho yelled. "The civilian ships need 10 more minutes." That's what this was all about. 3 transport ships full of families fleeing the war zone. Women, children, elderly people who just wanted to live. Jiho thought of his own family back on Earth. His younger brother Doyun, his sisters Nari and Yuna. They were safe in Busan. These civilians deserved the same chance. The boarding door exploded inward. Valorian soldiers poured through, their weapons firing bolts of superheated plasma. The corridor filled with smoke and the smell of burning metal. Jiho fired back. His bullets found their marks, but the Valorians kept coming. They were so big, so strong. One Marine next to him went down. Then another. "Fall back," Taeyang ordered. "Fighting retreat." They moved backward through the ship, making the Valorians pay for every meter. Jiho's arms ached. His ears rang from the noise. But he kept firing. Dr. Hana Im ran past with 2 wounded soldiers. "Medical bay is compromised," she called out. "Get to the escape pods." Taeyang shouted back, but there was a problem. The ship's systems were failing. Half the escape pods wouldn't launch. The civilians had taken the working ones. That was the plan. That was always the plan. Jiho found himself trapped in a dead-end corridor with 11 other Marines. The Valorians surrounded them. A massive warrior with silver scales stepped forward. His armor was decorated with marks of high rank. This was someone important. "Surrender," the Valorian said in broken human language. "No more death." Taeyang looked at his people. They were out of ammunition, out of options. Slowly, he lowered his weapon. "We surrender," he said. The Valorians took them prisoner quickly and efficiently. They weren't cruel about it, which surprised Jiho. He'd heard stories about Valorian prison camps. Terrible stories. But these soldiers just secured their hands and led them to a transport ship. The journey to the Valorian flagship was short. Jiho stared out the window at the void of space. Somewhere out there, those civilian ships were getting away. That made this worth it. He told himself that over and over. The flagship was enormous. The Crimson Dawn, they called it. Inside, everything was built for creatures much larger than humans. The ceilings were too high. The doors were too wide. Jiho felt like a child in a world of giants. They separated the prisoners. Taeyang and most of the squad went to the main brig. But there was a problem with overcrowding. The Valorians had captured another human ship the day before. "You," a guard pointed at Jiho. "Come with me." "Where are you taking him?" Dr. Hana Im demanded. She'd been captured too. Officer section. Temporary holding cell. "He will not be harmed." Taeyang grabbed Jiho's shoulder. "Stay strong, brother." Jiho nodded. The guard led him through winding corridors. The ship was cleaner than he expected. More organized. These weren't savages. These were professional soldiers just like him. That made this whole war feel even more wrong. The holding cell was small but not uncomfortable. It had a bench, a waste facility, and an energy barrier instead of bars. Through the barrier, Jiho could see a corridor with several doors. This wasn't the brig. This was near living quarters. "You stay here," the guard said. "General Kelvor's orders. You will receive food and water. Do not attempt escape." Then the guard left. Jiho sat on the bench and put his head in his hands. He was alive. His friends were alive. The civilians got away. He should feel good about that. But all he felt was tired. Hours passed. A Valorian brought him food. It wasn't human food, but it was edible. Some kind of protein bar and water. Jiho ate because he had to stay strong. Whatever came next, he needed his strength. Night cycle came. The lights in the corridor dimmed. Jiho tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the battle, saw his friends falling, saw the fear on Dr. Hana's face. On the second day, Jiho started to notice his surroundings more carefully. The doors across from his cell had decorative markings. Family quarters, he realized. Important families. That's why the guard mentioned General Kelvor. He was being held near the general's personal quarters. He heard sounds sometimes, voices speaking in the Valorian language. He couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the tone. Normal conversation. Laughter even. It reminded him that these aliens had lives beyond war. On the third day, everything changed. Jiho was doing push-ups to pass the time when he heard something, a small sound, a giggle. He looked up and froze. 3 small faces peered at him from the corridor. Valorian children. Their scales were softer than adult scales, colored in lighter shades. Their eyes were huge and curious. The smallest one pointed at him. Soft skin, she whispered in Valorian. Jiho didn't understand the word, but the tone was clear. Amazement. Jiho sat up slowly. He didn't want to scare them. The children stared at him like he was the most interesting thing they'd ever seen. The oldest, a girl, tilted her head. Human, the middle child said, clearly proud he knew the word. Jiho smiled gently. Back home, he'd taken care of his siblings all the time. He knew how to act around kids. He made a silly face, crossing his eyes and sticking out his tongue. All 3 cubs burst into giggles. The sound was surprisingly similar to human children laughing. It made Jiho's heart ache with homesickness. Shh, the oldest one hushed her siblings. We're not supposed to be here. But they didn't leave. They crept closer to the energy barrier, fascinated. Jiho waved at them. The youngest waved back, her small clawed hand mimicking his gesture. A guard walked past on patrol. Young ones, back to your quarters, he said. But his tone was indulgent. These children were clearly special. Probably the general's kids. The cubs scurried away, but the smallest one looked back at Jiho and waved again. Jiho waved back. For the first time since his capture, he smiled a real smile. He didn't know it yet, but that moment changed everything. 3 curious children had just started something that would end a war. The cubs came back the next morning. Jiho was awake when he heard the soft padding of small feet. He turned to see all 3 of them creeping down the corridor, checking to make sure no adults were watching. The oldest cub pressed close to the energy barrier. She was braver than her siblings. What are you? She asked in Valorian. Jiho didn't understand her words, but he understood the question. He pointed to himself. Human Jiho. Jiho, the middle cub repeated carefully. He seemed proud of himself for saying the strange word. The youngest cub, who couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 in human years, just stared with wide eyes. Her scales were pale blue, pretty like the sky back home. Jiho sat down cross-legged on the floor, making himself less threatening. The cubs mirrored his position on their side of the barrier. They looked at each other and giggled. You are small, the oldest cub said. Of course, Jiho still couldn't understand her, but her gesture made it clear. Humans were tiny compared to Valorians. Jiho shrugged and smiled. He held up his hands, showing them his fingers. 5 digits, no claws. The cubs were fascinated. They showed him their hands. 4 digits, each tipped with a small claw. This became their routine. Every day when the adults were busy, the cubs would visit. Jiho learned their sounds, their gestures. He couldn't speak their language, but communication went beyond words. He started making up games. He'd hide his face behind his hands, then reveal it suddenly. Peekaboo worked across species, apparently. The cubs loved it. On the 5th day, the oldest cub brought something. A small device that projected images. She showed Jiho her family. A tall male Valorian with silver scales and military bearing. That must be General Kaelvor, their father. Next to him stood a graceful female, their mother. Lady Saravix, Jiho learned from the cub's careful pronunciation. Jiho's heart squeezed. He pulled out his own photos from his chest pocket. The guards had let him keep them. He showed the cubs his family. His brother Doyen grinning at the camera. His sisters Nari and Yuna making silly faces. Family, he said, pointing to each person and saying their names. The oldest cub understood. Family, she repeated in human language. Then she pointed to herself. Lixa, she pointed to her brother. Kor, then her little sister. Pix, Jiho nodded. Lixa, Kor, Pix, good. Pix, the youngest, suddenly reached out toward the barrier. Jiho sad, she said in broken human language. It surprised him that she'd noticed. That she cared. His eyes stung with unexpected tears. Yes, he admitted. Jiho said. Miss Family. Lixa looked at him with something like sympathy. Even at her young age, she understood loneliness. Their mother was away, their father always busy with the war. They were lonely too. Story? Kor asked hopefully. Jiho wiped his eyes and nodded. He'd been telling them stories for the past 2 days. Simple tales at first, using gestures and expressions. But the cubs were smart. They picked up his words quickly. He told them about Earth, about the ocean near Busan where he grew up. He made wave motions with his hands. He told them about fish and boats and the smell of salt water. The cubs listened with complete attention. Then Pix asked something unexpected. "Scared?" "Am I scared?" Jiho asked. He thought about it. "Sometimes. War is scary. Father fights war," Lixa said quietly. "Mother says stop soon," Jiho nodded. Everyone wanted the war to stop. But nobody seemed to know how. The cubs stayed longer that day. A guard walked by and paused. He looked at the scene, at the enemy human entertaining the general's children. He should have reported it, should have separated them, but instead he just shook his head and walked away. Better the cubs were occupied here than causing trouble elsewhere, Jiho supposed. That night, Jiho couldn't sleep. He'd been thinking about his own siblings, about how scared they must have been when they heard his ship was attacked, about whether they knew he was alive. He started humming without thinking. An old song his grandmother used to sing, a Korean lullaby about the moon and stars. The melody filled his small cell. A sound made him look up. Pix stood in the corridor in her sleeping clothes. Tears ran down her face. "Bad dream," she whispered. Jiho's heart broke. The energy barrier was between them, but he sat close to it. "It's okay," he said softly. "Dreams can't hurt you. Mother gone, father busy, scared." Jiho kept humming the lullaby. Pix sat down on her side of the barrier, as close to him as she could get. Her small body shook with leftover fear. "Listen to the song," Jiho said gently. "My grandmother sang this when I was scared." He sang the words quietly in Korean. He had a decent voice, nothing special, but it was warm and comforting. Pix's breathing slowly calmed. Her eyes drooped. Lixa and Kor appeared in the corridor. They'd heard their sister leave. When they saw her sitting peacefully with Jiho, they came closer too. "Sing more," Lixa requested. So Jiho sang. He sang every lullaby he knew. He sang folk songs from Earth. He sang until all three cubs were drowsy and calm. A different guard came by on patrol. He saw the general's children in the corridor and his eyes widened in alarm. But the cubs refused to move. "Storyman," Pix said stubbornly. "Safe here." The guard looked uncertain. He should report this, but the cubs were clearly happy and safe. He made a decision. 10 minutes more. Then back to quarters. The cubs agreed. They listened to Jiho's songs for 10 more minutes. Then Lixa, being the responsible oldest, led her siblings back to their room. "Tomorrow?" Kor asked hopefully. "Tomorrow," Jiho agreed. After they left, Jiho sat in the darkness of his cell. Something strange was happening here. These children were supposed to be his enemy. Their father was leading the war against humanity. But when Jiho looked at them, all he saw were kids. Innocent kids who needed comfort and kindness. It reminded him why he joined the military in the first place. Not to hurt people. To protect them. To protect the innocent. Maybe that included Valorian cubs too. The next 2 days were the same. The cubs visited during the day. Jiho taught them human words. They taught him Valorian phrases. At night, when Pix had nightmares, she came to listen to his songs. The guards stopped trying to keep them apart. It seemed easier to let it happen. Besides, the cubs were happier. They ate better, slept better, even laughed more. On the 7th day, Jiho woke to chaos. Alarms blaring. Guards running. Something was very wrong. A guard stopped at his cell, his face twisted with worry. "Have you seen the general's children?" Jiho sat up, suddenly alert. "No, not this morning." "What happened?" "They're missing. We've searched everywhere." The guard's voice shook. Losing the general's cubs was a death sentence. 4 hours now. If something happened to them... The guard ran off, shouting orders. Jiho stood at his energy barrier, his mind racing. Where would 3 small cubs go? What if they were in danger? He hoped they were safe. Despite everything, despite the war, he'd grown to care about those 3 curious, sweet children. He didn't know that at that very moment someone was about to find them. And when they did, nothing would ever be the same. General Kaelvor stood on the bridge of his flagship, but his mind was not on the war. His cubs were missing. 4 hours and 17 minutes now. Every second felt like an eternity. "Report," he demanded, his voice sharp with barely controlled fear. "Sir, we've searched the entire ship. Every corridor, every room, every storage bay. The security officer looked terrified. No sign of them. Kael'vor's claws dug into the metal railing. His mate Saravix was away on a diplomatic mission. She'd trusted him to keep their children safe. And now, search again, he ordered. Check the escape pods. Check the waste systems. Check everywhere twice, the crew scattered. They all knew what was at stake. The general's cubs were not just his children. They were important to Valorian society. Nobles, future leaders. If something happened to them, heads would roll. Starting with anyone who'd been on guard duty. Down in the detention area, Jiho paced his small cell. He'd heard bits and pieces from passing guards. The cubs had been missing since early morning. They'd disappeared from their quarters sometime during the night. Jiho's mind raced. Where could 3 small cubs go on a starship? They were smart kids, curious but also sensible. Lixa always made sure her siblings stayed safe. Unless they'd come looking for him. His heart skipped. The energy barrier on his cell had been flickering yesterday. A technical issue, the guard said. What if the cubs had somehow gotten through? What if they were in here with him? He looked around his small cell more carefully. There wasn't much. A bench, a waste facility, a small storage compartment he'd never bothered to check because it was too high for him to reach. Jiho pulled the bench over and climbed up. He opened the storage compartment. 3 pairs of eyes blinked at him in the darkness. Shh, Lixa whispered, her finger to her lips. Jiho's jaw dropped. What are you doing in there? The cubs scrambled out of the compartment. They'd been hiding there for hours, cramped and uncomfortable but quiet. Pix immediately hugged Jiho's leg. Bad dreams again, she explained. Came for songs. But barrier was down, Kor added. So we came inside. And then alarms, Lixa finished. Knew they were looking for us. Too scared to come out. Jiho closed his eyes. This was bad, very bad. The entire ship was in panic mode. The general thought his children were kidnapped or hurt. And here they were, hiding in the human prisoner's cell. We have to tell someone you're here, Jiho said. Your father is worried. But we'll be in trouble, Pix said, her voice small. Yes, probably. But your father needs to know you're safe. Before Jiho could figure out what to do, the decision was made for him. A junior officer rushed past the cell, then stopped. He backed up slowly, his eyes going wide. The general's 3 missing cubs stood in the human prisoner's cell. The prisoner himself stood there with them. The energy barrier was at minimum power. The officer's hand went to his weapon. Don't move. Wait, Jiho said, raising his hands. This isn't what it looks like. But the officer was already calling for backup. Within seconds, guards poured into the corridor. Weapons drawn, faces showing shock and rage. Step away from the cubs, the lead guard commanded. Jiho tried to step back, but Pix wrapped her arms around his waist.
No, Jiho's safe.
Jiho, friend. Kor moved in front of Jiho defensively. He didn't take us. We came here. Lixa stood tall, trying to be brave. Don't hurt him. This is our fault, not his. The guards didn't lower their weapons. They'd found the general's missing cubs in an enemy combatant cell. It looked like a hostage situation. It looked like the human had used the cubs as leverage. Contact the general, the lead guard said. Now. The tension in the corridor was thick. Jiho kept his hands up, trying not to make any sudden moves. The cubs pressed close to him, scared of the weapons and angry faces. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Everyone knew that sound. General Kael'vor was coming. The general appeared, and Jiho understood why this warrior led fleets. He was massive, even for a Valorian. His silver scales gleamed like metal. His eyes blazed with barely controlled fury. He saw his cubs first. Relief crashed over his features. Then he saw where they were. Relief turned to rage. Father! Lixa called out. Kael'vor's eyes locked onto Jiho. What have you done to my children? Nothing, sir, Jiho said carefully. They came to me. The energy barrier malfunctioned. Lies. You took them as hostages. Father, no, Lixa protested. We came here on our own. But Kael'vor wasn't listening. Years of war, years of seeing humans as the enemy clouded his judgment. He saw a threat to his family. His claws extended. Kill him, he ordered. No! All 3 cubs screamed. Pix threw herself in front of Jiho. Kor and Lixa joined her, forming a barrier between their father and the human. Move aside, Kael'vor said. His voice dangerous. He didn't hurt us. Pix sobbed. He sang to us. He told us stories. He kept us company when you were too busy, Kor added, immediately regretting his words. The general flinched. His cubs were saying he'd neglected them, that they'd sought comfort from an enemy because their own father wasn't there. Lixa, he said to his oldest, tell me the truth. Did this human threaten you? Lixa looked her father in the eye. She was young, but she was brave. No, father. We've been visiting him for days. He's been kind to us. When Pix had nightmares and you were on the bridge, he sang her lullabies. When we were lonely because Mother is gone, he talked to us. He showed us pictures of his own family. You've been visiting a prisoner? For days? Kael'vor's anger shifted. Now he was angry at himself, at the guards, at the situation. The guards knew, Kor said quietly. They let us. Because we were happy. A terrible silence fell. Every guard in the corridor suddenly looked very interested in the floor. Kael'vor turned to his head of security. Explain, now. The security officer swallowed hard. Sir, the cubs were... They seemed content, happy. We thought it seemed harmless. Harmless. My children have been fraternizing with an enemy combatant, and... You thought it was harmless. Jiho finally spoke. General Kael'vor, may I say something? You may not, please. Just listen. Jiho looked at the 3 cubs clinging to him. I'm a soldier. I know my duty. But I'm also a brother. I have siblings back home. When your children came to me scared and lonely, I couldn't turn them away. They're just kids. They needed someone. I'm sorry it was me. I'm sorry it's complicated, but I would never hurt a child. Any child. Even in war, some things are sacred. Kael'vor stared at him, really looked at him for the first time. Not as an enemy, not as a threat, as a person. You could have used them, the general said slowly, as hostages, as leverage. You could have escaped. And teach them that adults can't be trusted. Jiho shook his head. No, sir. They trusted me. I won't betray that. Pix looked up at Jiho with her huge eyes. Then she looked at her father. Don't hurt him, Daddy, please. It was the daddy that did it. That word in his daughter's voice. Kael'vor's rage crumbled. His cubs were safe. They were happy. Because of this human. Take him to maximum security, Kael'vor said finally. The cubs returned to their quarters. No. All 3 protested, yes, the situation ends now. The general's voice was firm. Come, children. The guards carefully separated the cubs from Jiho. It was like pulling apart magnets. The cubs cried. Pix screamed. But in the end, they had to obey their father. As guards led Jiho away, he looked back. The 3 cubs stood with their father, tears streaming down their faces. They waved at him. He waved back, his own eyes burning. General Kael'vor watched the human prisoner go. His world had just turned upside down. Everything he thought he knew about humans was being challenged by his own children's tears. What kind of enemy shows kindness to their captor's cubs? What kind of warrior chooses compassion over escape? And what did it mean that his children trusted a human more than they trusted him? The maximum security cell was different from Jiho's previous one. Colder, darker, more isolated. He sat on the metal bench and tried not to think about the cubs' crying faces. He'd done the right thing. He knew that. But it didn't make him feel better. 2 days passed. Guards brought food and water but didn't speak to him. Jiho did push-ups and sit-ups to pass time. He hummed the lullabies he'd sung to the cubs. It helped him feel less alone. Meanwhile, in the general's quarters, chaos reigned. The cubs refused to eat. They sat in their room and cried. Lixa, normally so responsible, wouldn't speak to her father. Kor kept asking when he could see Jiho again. Pix had nightmares every night, and would only calm down when someone sang the Korean lullaby. But nobody knew the words. General Kael'vor had fought in dozens of battles. He'd commanded fleets. He'd made decisions that cost lives. But he'd never felt as helpless as he did watching his children suffer. On the 2nd day, he called for Dr. Hana Im. The human doctor had been treating wounded soldiers on both sides. She was professional and competent. More importantly, she might understand what was happening. Dr. Hana entered the general's office with her head high. She knew the general could kill her with one hand, but she refused to show fear. You wanted to see me? She asked. My cubs, Kael'vor said. They won't eat. They barely sleep. Your medical expertise says what is wrong. Dr. Hana studied the general. This proud warrior looked exhausted. May I examine them? Yes, do what you must. She found the 3 cubs in their quarters. They looked smaller than she'd expected. More fragile. Lixa sat with her arms around her siblings. When Hana entered, all 3 looked at her with hope. Are you here about Jiho? Lixa asked. I'm here to check on you, Hana said gently. She examined each cub. Their vital signs were normal. No injuries, no illness. Just emotional distress, he sang to us, Pix said quietly. Made us feel safe. Hana sat down with them. Tell me about Jiho. The cubs' faces lit up. They told her everything. The silly faces. The stories. The songs. How Jiho showed them his family photos. How he never scared them even though he was a prisoner. He has a brother named Doyen, Kor said. And sisters Nari and Yuna. He told us about Earth, Lixa added. About the ocean. He said water goes on forever. Can you imagine? Dr. Hana listened. And slowly she understood. These cubs had bonded with Jiho. In psychology, humans called it attachment. It happened with children and caregivers. It crossed all boundaries, even species. She returned to General Kalvor with her report. They're healthy physically. But emotionally, they've formed a bond with Corporal Park. Separating them is causing distress. He's an enemy soldier, Kalvor growled. He's also someone who showed your children kindness when they needed it. Dr. Hana chose her next words carefully.
General, I've served in this war for 3 years.
I've seen the worst of what both our species can do. But I've also learned something. When it comes to children, humans have a very strong instinct. We call it pack bonding. We protect young ones. We nurture them, even if they're not our own. You're saying this is normal for humans? Very normal. Corporal Park has 3 younger siblings. He practically raised them. When your cubs came to him scared and lonely, his instincts kicked in. He couldn't help but care for them. Kalvor was quiet for a long moment. We Valorians also protect our young fiercely. It's our highest law. To harm a cub is the worst crime possible. Then maybe we're not so different, Hana said softly. The general dismissed her, but her words stayed with him. That night he sat alone in his office thinking. The war had started over a misunderstanding in a border system. Humans had thought Valorians were invading. Valorians had thought humans were attacking. Neither side had tried to communicate. They just started shooting, 3 years, thousands dead on both sides. And for what? He looked at a photo of his family. His mate Sarovic smiled at the camera. His cubs were younger than innocent. They still had that innocence. They didn't see enemies. They just saw Jiho, who sang them songs. In the main brig, Commander Taeyang Cho heard rumors about Jiho. At first he was angry. His soldier had fraternized with the enemy, had gotten close to the general's family. It sounded like collaboration, but then Dr. Hana came to see him. She explained what really happened. How the cubs had sought Jiho out. How Jiho had just been kind. He didn't betray us, Hana said. He showed them we're people. That humans aren't monsters. That might be more valuable than any intelligence. Taeyang considered this. The general must see us differently now. Maybe. Or maybe he's more confused than ever. She was right. General Kalvor was very confused. He called a meeting with his senior officers. The Valorian commanders gathered in his war room. The human prisoner, Kalvor began, the one who was with my cubs. What do we know about him? Corporal Jiho Park, an intelligence officer, reported. Age 26. Enlisted 5 years ago. Exemplary record. Multiple commendations for bravery. Known for protecting civilians during evacuation missions. Family?
Parents deceased.
Raised 3 younger siblings on his own while working. Joined the military to pay for their education. Sends most of his pay home to them. Kalvor absorbed this. So he's a protector. A guardian. It appears so, sir, another officer spoke up. Sir, with respect, we should execute this human. He's caused a security breach. Your cubs were found in his cell. It sets a dangerous precedent. He didn't cause the breach, Kalvor said. My cubs did, and they were never in danger. But sir, enough. The general's voice was firm. I'm making a decision that may seem unusual, but I believe it's correct. The next morning, guards came for Jiho. He thought they were taking him to execution. Instead, they led him back to officer territory. To the family quarters. General Kalvor waited outside his personal rooms. He looked at Jiho with an expression that was hard to read. Corporal Park, he said formally. Sir, Jiho replied. My cubs have been unwell since our separation. They refuse food. They have nightmares. The ship's doctor says they need—" He paused like the words were difficult. "They need you." Jiho wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. "Sir? My mate is away for another week. I am occupied with fleet operations. I cannot give my cubs the attention they need. You will stay in the guest quarters. You will be supervised, but you may spend time with them. You trust me with them?" Jiho asked, shocked. "No," Kalvor said honestly, "but they trust you, and they've never been wrong about people before." He stepped closer. "But understand this, human. If you harm them, if you try to use them as leverage, if you do anything that makes them cry, I will kill you slowly. Very slowly. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." "Why did you do it?" Kalvor asked suddenly. "You could have used them to escape, to negotiate. Why didn't you?" Jiho thought about his answer carefully. "I have siblings, General. Doyen, Nari, and Yuna. If I was ever captured in war, I'd hope someone would be kind to them if they were scared. Your cubs were scared. They needed someone. I was just there." Something shifted in Kalvor's eyes. "Understanding, maybe? Or respect, come," he said. "They've been waiting." He opened the door to his quarters. 3 cubs sat on a couch looking miserable. When they saw Jiho, their faces transformed. "Jiho!" They screamed and ran to him. He knelt down and caught them in a hug. They all talked at once, touching his face, his hands, making sure he was real. "I'm here," he said, his voice thick. "I'm here." General Kalvor watched this scene. An enemy soldier hugging his children. His children happier than they'd been in days. It was strange. It was unsettling. But it was also somehow right. 1 week, he told Jiho, until my mate returns. You will care for them during the day. Guards will watch you. Then we decide what happens next. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Kalvor left to return to his duties. Behind him, he heard Pix ask Jiho to sing the lullaby. He heard his children laugh. For the first time in 3 years, General Kalvor questioned whether this war was worth fighting. For 6 days, Jiho lived in a strange new routine. Each morning, guards escorted him to the general's quarters. He spent the day with Lixa, Kor, and Pix. They played games. He taught them more human words. They taught him Valorian. In the evenings, he sang them to sleep before guards took him back to his cell. It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't prison either. It was something in between. The cubs flourished, they ate their meals, they laughed, they learned. Jiho found himself teaching them things his grandmother had taught him. How to fold paper into shapes, how to count in Korean, how to appreciate silence. General Kalvor watched from a distance. He saw his children happy and healthy. He saw the human treating them with genuine care. It confused him. The enemy wasn't supposed to be kind. On the 4th day, disaster struck elsewhere on the ship. Some of the human prisoners in the main brig had been planning an escape. They'd been working on it for days, stealing tools, mapping patrol routes. They didn't know about Jiho's situation. They only knew they had to get home. The escape attempt went wrong. Fighting broke out. An energy conduit was damaged. Fire spread through 3 decks. Alarms screamed through the ship. All personnel rushed to battle stations. In the chaos, someone forgot about the cubs. Jiho was with them in their playroom when the smoke started coming through the vents. He smelled it immediately. Lixa, Kor, Pix, come here now, he said, his voice calm but urgent. The cubs heard the tone and obeyed. He wrapped them in blankets to protect them from heat. The door was already hot to the touch. Stay low, he told them. Smoke rises. Breathe through the blankets. The cubs were scared, but they trusted him. He led them toward the emergency exit, but flames blocked the path. He turned another direction. More fire. They were trapped. Jiho. Pix whimpered. It's okay. We'll find a way. But Jiho wasn't sure. The heat was intense. The smoke was getting thicker. He remembered seeing ventilation shafts, too small for adults, but maybe big enough for cubs. He found one and forced it open. The metal was hot. It burned his hands, but he didn't stop. Lixa, you're the oldest. You go first. Crawl straight. Don't stop until you find a guard or a grown-up. What about you? She asked. I'm too big. I can't fit. But you can. Go. Take care of your brother and sister. Lixa understood. Tears ran down her face. Thank you, Jiho. She climbed into the vent. Kor went next, then Pix. Jiho pushed them forward even as flames licked closer. He made sure they were moving in the right direction before he closed the vent. Then he turned to face the fire. He couldn't fit in the vent. But maybe he could slow the fire. Buy the cubs time. He grabbed an emergency blanket and started beating at the flames. The heat was overwhelming. The smoke choked him, but he kept fighting. In another part of the ship, Commander Taeyang Cho and the human prisoners had been subdued. Dr. Hana Im was helping treat the wounded when she heard about the fire near the general's quarters. The cubs, she gasped. General Kylvor was already running. His children were in that section. His children and the human he'd trusted with them. He found the cubs emerging from a ventilation shaft, coughing and crying but alive. Relief nearly drove him to his knees. Father, Lixa cried. Jiho saved us. He's still in there. Kylvor didn't hesitate. He ran into the burning corridor. The heat was tremendous even for his armored scales. He found Jiho collapsed near a wall, still clutching a burned blanket. The human's hands were blistered. His uniform was singed, but he was breathing. The general picked him up as easily as lifting a child. He carried Jiho out of the inferno. Dr. Hana Im took over immediately. Get him to medical now. Jiho woke up 3 days later. His hands were bandaged. His throat hurt. But he was alive. Dr. Hana sat beside his bed. Welcome back. The cubs? He asked immediately. Safe. Thanks to you. She smiled. You're a hero, Jiho. Again. I just did what anyone would do. No. You did what very few people would do. You saved children while you were a prisoner. You could have escaped in that chaos. Instead, you protected them. Jiho closed his eyes. Couldn't leave them. Over the next week, something changed on the Crimson Dawn. The story spread. The human prisoner who saved the general's cubs. Valorian soldiers started looking at the human prisoners differently. Maybe they weren't so different. Maybe they weren't monsters. Commander Taeyang Cho was brought to see Jiho. He'd been angry about the failed escape. Lives were lost on both sides. But when he saw Jiho's burned hands, saw the truth in his friend's eyes, his anger faded. You did good, brother, Taeyang said quietly. Maybe better than fighting would have done. Lady Saravix returned from her diplomatic mission to find everything changed. Her mate told her the whole story. How their cubs had befriended a human. How that human had saved their lives. She insisted on meeting Jiho. When she entered his medical room, he tried to stand, but she gestured for him to stay seated. Corporal Park, she said in perfect human language. My children speak of you constantly. They call you Uncle Jiho. They're wonderful cubs, ma'am. You've raised them well. My mate tells me you could have used them, could have escaped, could have let them burn. Her eyes were intense. Why didn't you? Jiho was tired of this question, but he answered honestly one more time. Because they're children, because they were innocent, because somewhere someone might show the same kindness to my siblings if they needed it, because it was the right thing to do. Lady Saravix studied him for a long moment. Then she did something no Valorian had done to a human in 3 years of war. She bowed deeply, showing respect. You have my gratitude, she said. And my respect. You are welcome in our home anytime. That evening, General Kylvor made a decision. He opened a secret communication channel to the human fleet. It took hours of negotiation with suspicious admirals on both sides, but eventually he got through. This is General Kylvor of the Valorian Empire. I wish to speak about peace. The talk started slowly. There was too much bad blood, too much loss. But Kylvor brought Dr. Hana Im to the table. He brought video of his cubs playing with Jiho. He showed that humans and Valorians could coexist. Both sides started investigating how the war began. They found mistakes on both sides, misunderstandings, failed communications, pride and fear. 6 months later, a preliminary peace treaty was signed. It wasn't perfect. There was still distrust, but it was a beginning. Jiho was released to return to Earth. Before he left, the cubs came to say goodbye. They'd grown in 6 months. Lixa was taller. Kor's scales had darkened. Pix had lost a baby tooth. "Will we see you again?" Pix asked, hugging him tight. "I hope so," Jiho said. "The war is over. Maybe humans and Valorians can be friends now." "You'll always be our friend," Kor said. Lixa handed him a gift. It was a carved stone, a Valorian family talisman. "You're part of our family now. This means you always will be." Jiho's eyes filled with tears. He accepted the gift with both hands, bowing deeply. General Kylvor and Lady Saravik stood nearby. The general approached and offered his hand in the human gesture of respect. "You changed my mind about your species," Kylvor said. "You showed me that enemies can become friends. That war isn't the only answer. For that, you have my thanks." Jiho shook his hand. "Thank you for trusting me with your cubs, sir. They're special. They learned much from you. Perhaps more than you learned from them." Back on Earth, Jiho was reunited with his siblings. Doyun had grown taller. Nari was in middle school now. Yuna tackled him with a hug that nearly knocked him over. His story became famous. The Marine who ended a war by being kind, but Jiho didn't feel like a hero. He'd just done what felt right. He kept the Valorian family talisman on his desk. Sometimes he'd get holographic messages from the cubs. They were learning Korean. They wanted to visit Earth someday. A year after the peace treaty, Jiho was invited to the formal ceremony establishing diplomatic relations between Earth and Valoria. He stood with Commander Taeyang Cho and Dr. Hana Im as both species pledged cooperation. During the reception, the cubs found him in the crowd. They were older now, more mature, but still his cubs in many ways. "Uncle Jiho," they called out, running to him. He caught them in a hug, laughing. Cameras flashed. This moment would become iconic. 3 Valorian cubs embracing a human soldier. 2 species. 1 family. General Kylvor watched from the stage. He leaned to his mate and whispered, "That human. That kind human. He started all of this." "No," Lady Saravix corrected gently. "Our cubs started it. He just showed them that kindness exists everywhere, even in war." Commander Taeyang Cho stood with other human officers. One of them said, "How did we win the peace, sir?" Taeyang smiled, watching Jiho with the cubs. "We didn't win it. We sang it into existence. One lullaby at a time." The war was over. A new era had begun, all because 3 curious cubs went missing, and a captured human Marine chose compassion over escape. All because sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is be gentle. Years later, when people asked Jiho about his role in ending the war, he always said the same thing. "I didn't do anything special. I just sang some songs to scared kids. The rest, well, that was all them. Children see the world differently. They don't see enemies. They just see people who need a friend." And in that simple truth was the key to peace that governments and generals had missed. Sometimes all it takes to end a war is one person choosing kindness when everyone expects cruelty. One person seeing a child instead of an